Now in this next lesson, let's go and proceed to the file path section here that says that if we want files to talk to one another, we will be needing to provide a file path between them. So it's basically a route so one file knows where another one is. So we've already done the examples here. If you can see, we have our images folder, we have our index.html inside of our main folder here. We can see that we have the index.html here. So now what we want to do here is to go down here inside of the some general rules for file paths, and let's try to understand the content. We can see here that we've already done the first example here from where we have the file in the same directory. So we just need to use the file name. So let's just go open our code editor here and let's see here our examples. So we do have the float property.html, which is inside of the main directory that we have here. We can see here that if we try to open this in our file explorer and then we try to click on the link here that we've created, we were redirected to the float property exercise web page. And you would see now that we are missing most of our photos here because we transferred them into a new directory or a new folder. If you remember, when we tried to organize our files, we transferred most of the images that were here in the images folder into a float property subdirectory. Now let's go back to our documentation here and let's try to go and check here. To reference a file in a subdirectory, write the directory name in front of the path plus a / subdirectory myimage.jpg. And that's what we did in our float property .html file. So if we go down here, we can see that we use that method here, images, the images folder, and then the file name. Now if we want to make all of the photos appear again in our gallery here, we will need to adjust some of the naming here for the file paths. So instead of just using the images folder, we know that the files now are inside of a subfolder named float property. So let me just / and you will see that Visual Studio Code is teaching us or giving us a hint on where the file is located. So now if I save this, now let's see if it will work. Let me refresh the file here, and now we have our first photo appearing inside of our image galleries. Now let's just go and add the float property folder here. Float property / and then save. Now let's refresh our browser here. You will see now that most of our images inside of our gallery is now back in our website. Now let's try to go and have a link going back to our index.html instead of using a one page go back right click here on our browser. Let's go back to our code editor here and then proceed to the P. Below the P tag here, let's go and create a hyperlink, href, and then let's have back to home page. Then index.html. Let's save that and let's see what will happen on our browser. So we now have a back to home page here linked to our main page. So if I click on this, it goes back to our homepage section here. So let me just go back to the float property exercises here. So we can see that we do have that link and it's working because we do have the index.html placed inside of the root directory together with the float property HTML. But if we try to transfer, so let's have exercises folder here. Now let's try to go and transfer the float property here inside of our exercises folder. Let's see if that will still work. Now let's try to refresh our browser. You would see it says here file not found. So we are now running an error from where we will need to go and check to see if the file was moved, renamed, or deleted. We do know that the file was moved to another folder. So what we're going to need to do here is to go to our index.html here and then make sure that we go and practice what we have learned so far. And that will be to use the exercises, then the float property HTML file here. Then go back to our browser, refresh. Let me just go back here. Still missing. Okay, let me just go back here and refresh this and then try to click on this. Okay, so we needed to refresh the index.html so that we can be redirected to the new folder, which is the exercises folder, and then to the float property.html. Now, what we need to know if one of our links that we've just recently created will still be working, and that will be the links to the images and the link to the back to home page. And again, it's not working anymore. These are some of the challenges that you might encounter in the future. That's why I'm showing it to you right now, and I wanted you to have an idea once you transfer one file, renamed it, or deleted it, some of your links might become broken. So let's go back to our code editor here, and we know that the float property.html is here inside of our exercises folder, and that is indicated by the / here. And if we go to the float property.html here, the reason why this is not working is because we now know that the float property.html is inside of the exercises folder, and we need to go to the directory from where the images folder is located. And similar with the index.html, we know that the index.html is one directory above the exercises folder here. So that means if we go back to our documentation here, it says here, to link to a target file in the directory above the invoking HTML file, we need to write 2 dots. So for example, if index.html, float property.html, was inside a subfolder test site, our exercises folder, and my image.jpg was inside the test site here, you could reference my image.jpg from index.html using the double dots and / my image.jpg. So this is referencing the parent directory. Just don't get confused, everyone, because I'm just trying to compare the example here to our example. But the idea here, the index.html is inside a subfolder, and this is the main parent directory, and my image was inside of the test site or the parent directory. You could reference my image JPEG from index.html using the my image.jpg here with the double dots and the /, which represents the parent directory. In our case, the HTML section 5 interactive content is the parent directory, and the exercises folder is the subfolder, and we have the float property.html inside of that. So if we want to reference the index.html here, we will need to use the parent directory characters here. So if we try to save this, and let's go back to our float property exercises here and then back to home page, you would see that the link is now working because we were able to link it to our parent directory. Now, the only thing that we need to do here will be to make sure that the images will be loading by referencing it inside of the images folder by moving one folder up using the parent directory here, because the images folder is inside of the parent directory. So let's try to refresh this and see if that will work. So you will see now that the first image has loaded and was displayed on our browser. Now let's try to go and apply that inside of our float property HTML here so that we can go and have each of our images load and be displayed on our float property HTML file. I hope that you understood how the relative and absolute path works. And just one keynote, everyone, the Windows file system here tends to use backslashes, not /. See Windows, this doesn't matter in HTML. Even if you are developing your website on Windows, you should still use / in your code. Okay, what does that mean? If ever we saved our file here, we can see that this is the absolute path to the exercises folder here. And if we use that inside of our code editor, but this is not recommended, again, we maximize the use of relative paths, because if we transfer our files into another computer, there is a big probability that the links will get broken. So we maximize the use of relative paths, especially if we transfer our files into a cloud server or the hosting company from where we will be uploading our files to the internet. It might end up getting broken. So it's really important that you have that in mind when you're building your websites and you're getting ready for uploading it and making sure that it will be published on the internet. So we now have our links working, we have the images working. So that will be all for this lesson, and thank you. See you on our next lesson.